Greetings, this is the Questing GM and welcome to another questlog video for our ongoing Star Trek Adventures First Response campaign. This video in particular is going to be talking about the character that I have created for the campaign for Star Trek Adventures. So the funny story is I actually did a recording of the entire character generation process, reading the rules while making the character and making decisions along the way, which lasted for 3 hours, only to find out that the entire video did not have any audio. So to spare yourself and myself the agony of going through the entire process again, this is just going to be a much more summarized and cut down version of the life path creation method that is being used in Star Trek Adventures. This is not entirely going to be the learning video that I would have liked to make, but I think I will reserve the learning portions in a future video series, maybe as part of the RPG study hour for Star Trek Adventures, if I do get the time to make it eventually. This one is just going to be a quick rundown through the process, maybe give a few thoughts on what were the decisions that I had to make and did make in the end, for each step, and hopefully it would be useful as a sample character creation process if you are learning Star Trek Adventures. But if you are here because you are part of following us on our Star Trek Adventures campaign First Response, then this will probably provide you with some context, or at least some background of my character in that game, and maybe I'll share a few insights on how I plan to play my character in Star Trek in the First Response campaign. So we'll start off with the steps that was taken in order to create my character. And if you haven't already known yet, or if you've not heard the name, he goes by the name of Yang. So he's ranked as Ensign, a fresh graduate from the Starfleet Academy on his first assignment on the USS Avicenna, as a helmsman, as what his specialty has shown. So let us begin, and we shall talk about the first step of creating a character in Star Trek Adventures. And the step number one is to choose your species. So if we look at this, so in Star Trek Adventures, the species that are available to you is actually dependent on the era that you've chosen to play. Naturally, the later eras of the franchise would allow for a much more diversified selection of species, but since we are playing in Star Trek Adventures in the original series era, where things were rather human centric, there weren't as many races to pick from. But for my case, I felt that being not only as a newcomer to the system, but also as a relative newcomer to this franchise and the universe as a whole, I felt that it was the only reasonable thing for me to do was to keep it rather simple, and therefore I decided to pick what other choice do I have was to be a human. So as you can see on my character sheet here, it says my species is human, and that's my name as well, Ensign Yang. The choice of your species gives you a trait, and I believe it also gives you a talent. Certain talents are only available to certain species, and humans certainly have, I believe there's only 2 talents that are only available to them as a species, but it doesn't mean that you cannot choose any other more general talents that also can be found in the Star Trek Adventures core rulebook. So once that we were done with talents, the next thing that we move on to is step 2. So now that we are done with step 1, selecting our species, we move on to step 2, And step 2 is the environment of where which my character grows up in. In Star Trek Adventures, in the core rulebooks, as you will see, there are actually various environments that your character can originate from, thanks to the Federation of Planets and the building of star bases and colonies on different planets as well. There is actually a rather large choices that your character could grow up on. So I should make a note here saying that in general, at least by the book, you are given the choice to roll randomly uh, for each step of the life path creation process for your character. So you could actually just create a character through randomization, giving harking back to a little bit of the old school style of role-playing games. But in this for this case, this is actually where I decided to utilize that, because I was not particularly stuck to the idea that I had to be a pure human in this sense, and I was actually quite happy to adapt my character to whichever environment that he was destined upon. And it was probably quite surprising that my results actually led me to my homeworld, the human homeworld, which is Earth. So that is my environment, as you can see in my character sheet. And by selecting your environment, it affects the value of it provides you with one value of your character for being from that particular environment, in this case Earth. It also gives certain benefits. It also starts giving you numerical benefits to your attributes and disciplines, as you can also see in this lower section here, that I would probably may or may not talk about later on, because these are just numbers that may or may not have any real implications on to what my character is. So in the third step, this is where we talk about the upbringing of the character in that environment. There's a list of different types of upbringing that a character is brought up in. This can range from certain kind of background, occupational backgrounds, maybe even a bit of a social class background, that sort of thing. And this is also another place that I've decided that I would roll for this, and not making a preemptive decision. So I would roll for this. The background that I got for this was politics and diplomacy and politics, as you can see here. Now, this was a rather coincidental thing, because this was actually the same background that was rolled by another player. Now, the interesting thing about Star Trek Adventures is that despite getting a background, there is one decision point that you have to make. That's whether that your character chooses to accept his upbringing, that you have conformed to the standards and these maybe proper manners and etiquette or social pressures that have been imposed upon from that upbringing, or you can choose to rebel, which means that you have decided to deviate from the social norms of that background, and therefore that could lead to different kind of distributions, in this case, or different benefits to what your upbringing would give you. So the upbringing that Ron Edwards' character had was diplomacy and politics, but he chose to rebel. In my case, I felt that since we have somewhat similar backgrounds, I would choose to be the one who leans on the accepted side, and this was rather intentional on my part, so that we can create some sort of tension, or at least a different perspective on things. even though we have somewhat common ground in terms of how we grew as individuals. So by selecting your upbringing and choosing whether you decide to accept or rebel against your upbringing, it would affect your attributes once again. It will also affect your disciplines, and it will provide you with a focus and also a talent. And as you can see here, the upbringing that I have, the talent, the focus that I have decided to take as a result of my upbringing is to have diplomacy. Partly because that it's what I learned growing up in a family of probably diplomats. This is probably a good place to maybe make some assumptions or make some estimations of what are the exact details of Yang's upbringing in a diplomatic and political sort of environment on Earth, especially. So I would say in Yang's case, an interesting background story that I'm not going to formalize or cement, but I would say vaguely at this point, and maybe it's something that we brought up during play, is that Yang does come from a relatively respectable family, and they have made their living, or they have made their reputation on politics and diplomacy, whether as members of a bureaucratic government, at which requires respect, a lot of respect, and maybe even votes from people. So this is the kind of environment where Yang grew up, where diplomacy is quite a weapon. It can be a weaponized thing, only because it's a matter of survival, or this is the skills that the family heavily relies upon to become who they are. And in the case for Yang, he is just basically following the family business in that sense. So now that we are done talking about the upbringing, we will now move on to step 4. So step 4 is where our character enters into Starfleet Academy, and this is basically where our characters begin training to be a Starfleet officer, and eventually to be reporting for duty on a Starfleet ship. In this area, this is where you would choose. This is where my character, or your character, or the character would choose their specialties. It would be the formative years they spend in Starfleet Academy. It would be the place where a character would choose their path, what kind of role they would like to play in a Starfleet ship. My decision for Yang, finally may come, is actually to be in the command route or command path, and this is because because of his upbringing in a diplomatic political background, to be somewhat of a leader. This is probably what feels like a natural path for him. That he has been groomed with some commanding abilities, and therefore he felt that this is the best place for him to extend on those abilities to eventually command, to be able to take command on a Starfleet ship. So in step 4, the effects here are, it gives you a value. It adds, I believe, it is your second value as a character. It definitely has huge numbers added to your attributes and your discipline, particularly your discipline, because that's where you decide to choose which is going to be your major or major discipline as a staff like trainee or cadet, and definitely gives you a three focuses as where you'll be able to uh, practice or hone in on your innate skills that is related to Starfleet, and also a talent. Yang's days in Starfleet Academy, I would say, are pretty much normal or or nothing unusual. Uh, days that he's taken going down the command path, and therefore he has only learned to uh, increase uh, his leadership qualities, uh, but at the same time, in terms of a skill that he has learned to be more useful on a Starfleet ship, uh, is the cons, and the and in particular I would say the controlling of a ship. uh, so this is actually where some of my focus, as you may see here. It includes evasive actions, uh, and his formal training gives him a very special understanding of Starfleet protocol. And part of the reason why I chose that is because I think for Yang, as someone who abides by the rules of society, he would feel that by having a very specific understanding of Starfleet protocol, it would not only inform how he makes decisions, it would inform also how he sees situations, because he has to start from a guideline. Uh, Yang is definitely someone who plays by the rules, and I think that in itself is going to grind up the gears of Ron Edwards' character, which is even more tension that can be generated, uh, and I think that can be played out rather interestingly, because you know uh, given the rank differences between Yang uh, and the security officer, I think would be rather a good demonstration in a way of how values and focuses can clash, but at the same time, having to be able to need there creates a need to find either a compromise or a middle ground for the success of the entire crew. Now, the value that I've chosen for Yang from his Starfleet Academy days is serving Starfleet is a family tradition. So this also brings back, this can be tied with the upbringing and the political and diplomacy path uh, of Yang's family, or maybe even the extended family, is because that perhaps, as I said, Yang comes from a family of politician or bureaucratic government, and that bureaucratic government could be the Federation itself. So he might actually have relatives or even parents in high places, which gives him this particular value that being able to serve in Starfleet is part of the family tradition, and it is something that he may feel that he has to uphold. He has to uphold that sense of pride in serving Starfleet, but at the same time, that also could give him some pressures that he has to be able to perform in Starfleet as highly as he can, just to impress the rest of the family. So there is a mixture of both pride and maybe even prejudice against Starfleet because of this tradition. So that is step 4, and now we can move on to step 5. So step 5 of the life path creation process is career, and this is going to be a assessment or more of a development from your Starfleet Academy days? uh, where has your character gone in terms of his career? How far has he reached in the hierarchy, or in the hierarchy of Starfleet Command? uh, and this is quite an easy this is quite an easy decision for me to make, because there is pretty much only three options. You could be a young officer, you could be an experienced officer, or you could be a veteran. And easy enough for me to say that since I'm going with an idea not only as a uh, new officer, as an ensign who has just freshly graduated from Starfleet Academy, but it also aligns with my own fresh knowledge of, uh, or maybe even lack of knowledge of Star Trek, the Star Trek universe, and therefore I think it's much more easier for me to play into the idea that I'm someone who doesn't have any experience in the wider universe of Star Trek, or in Yang's case, the world. So I've easily chosen to be a young officer uh, for Yang. And the interesting thing here is, when you choose to be a young officer in as your career, it affects your talent. So the default in Star Trek Adventures is actually that you will be an experienced officer. But if you chose to be a young officer, there are you gain an interesting talent here, which is called untapped potential. And I've even given you the page number that can be found on the core rulebook. So when you have untapped potential, it actually puts a cap onto your disciplines and attributes. As you can see here, none of my numbers here exceed 11, because 11 is the highest number, as well as your disciplines, which doesn't exceed anything beyond 4, which is also the cap. But in exchange for that, it actually gives you an interesting ability that utilizes that may give you extra momentum to demonstrate the untapped potentials that Yang has, or young officer has, that may be unexpected by the crew or even by the characters themselves. So this is definitely something that I appreciate, that is part of Yang's character, and him having untapped potentials that he may not see himself, despite being focused on the path that he thinks he knows where he's going. So another thing that affects your character from your choice of your career, in this case as a young officer, is also it gives you another value. And in this case, I think it's quite easy to say that the value that would definitely reflect on Yang is being inexperienced and idealistic, which is somewhat what he really is. He is, the naivety that comes with being a fresh graduate does play into this value pretty well. And given that he has certain ideas of Starfleet thanks to his familial ties or tradition to it, he thinks he definitely does hold certain idealistic views about what Starfleet is, what Starfleet does, and what Starfleet means to the Federation. So now that we have finished with step 5, we can now move on into step 6 as we get closer to the end. In step 6, we choose the career events. These are events that has happened during the career of the character that has very transformative or defining effects on the character. So this is actually a rather interesting step in the entire life path creation process, because this is something that sort of either challenges whatever preconceived values that the character may have had all this while. Or this is where reality bites. And the character can, depending on what kind of events that you get or you choose, it can cause a character growth, or it can cause a subversion of that character growth. That whatever, but that a certain path that your character may have taken all this while up to this point may drastically change, may even reverse whatever growth that has been made, or it may have taken them into new directions that would have otherwise been outside the control of the character's own life decisions. So while there are, I think, about 20 known character events available in the core rulebook, and I believe there may be some leeway into the core rules to allow a character to create their own career events, but our game master Runeslinger has sort of told us that we should stick to the events that are available in the core rulebooks. So this is once again when I decided to let the dice decide my fate, and you are supposed to roll for 2 events. You're supposed to roll twice on the table. So the events that I got: Betrayed Ideals for a Superior, and this is going to be a rather interesting one in regards to Yang's background and story and history. And the second event that I got was Transporter Accident. So which plays in quite well with the original era series, because if you recall, there are certain episodes, or there is at least particularly one episode where the transporter does become the cause of what happens in the rest of the episode, of that particular episode, and it was not a very pretty episode, to say the least. And also because, and even in the book itself, the core rulebook itself sort of tells you that certain technologies that appears in Star Trek may have a much different level of safety when it comes to the era that's been chosen. And the transporter was definitely one of the more less reliable, let's just say less reliable technologies during the original series era than the later eras. So this was more likely, a transporter accident was more likely to happen in the original series, and for Yang to experience this firsthand was probably going to be a very scarring incident. And one thing I should mention also about career events, that if you thought of the question, oh wait a minute, if Yang is supposed to be a young officer and he's just fresh out of Starfleet Academy, how can he experience these events on if he hasn't even been on a ship? So in the core rulebooks, it tells you that these events, if you are a young officer and you've chosen the young officer career, these events actually take place during your days in Starfleet Academy. So this actually even makes it even more disturbing and drastic for Yang's case, because to experience a transporter accident during your training days is probably going to traumatize its use, even for probably the rest of his career on a real starship with using a real transporter. But let's get back to the first event for a while. Betrayed Ideals for a Superior, and this is going to be interesting, and this is something that I've been building Yang towards to, from his family background and upbringing, and his relationship with Starfleet, is that he may have been either a victim or an advocate of nepotism inside Starfleet. He may actually condone certain actions that would elevate the status of a superior, possibly a relative or a family member, to the higher ranks of Starfleet, and not necessarily through merit. So this is going to be definitely one of the more controversial interpretations and takes of people who are familiar with Star Trek universe. But from my understanding, uh, at least during the original series, Star Starfleet was probably a little more corrupt, uh, maybe due to its large size or its bureaucratic nature, that it was quite possible uh, that there may be there may be people within Starfleet that would take certain less legitimate paths to power. And given how I built Yang and his familial ties, uh, both to his family and also to Starfleet, I think it is quite likely that he might find himself in a position that either him or a family member, uh, or like I said, or even extended family member would be able to benefit from such rather corrupt practices. These are definitely personal crises of values, because as I said, he may have certain pride in being a member of Starfleet, only to realize that the reason why the family is so embedded into Starfleet is that they could prop each other up into the higher echelons of Starfleet. And with numbers, it is more likely for it to happen. So Yang may be hiding that, maybe hiding a certain past that he used his days in Starfleet Academy to elevate someone within Starfleet. Whether this is something that he regrets or whether this is something that he accepts is probably something that I will decide later on, when such values, when that particular value gets to come into play. And that is actually one of the values that I've decided to pick for my last value, which we will talk about when we get to that particular last step. There are actually questions related with career events, which I think I won't be able to answer them right now. I do have a rough idea of what my answers are, but I don't think I want to put them in too specific a detail that it doesn't allow them to be reinterpreted when the situation calls for it, or when there is an appropriate time for that to come to light, and therefore makes therefore can be used as a great role-playing moment. The transporter incident, however, it's pretty obvious and pretty interesting, rather, because they can give you a focus as a result of those career events. This is one where I intentionally play to the assignment of the ship that Yang is being put on, because one of the main features of the ship, the Epicena, is that it has an extended shuttle bay, partly because of its crisis response, and therefore there may be some sort of rescue or evacuation missions, and therefore we have a more advanced shuttle bay and shuttles that can be used. And given Yang's personal accident, or at least a witness to an transporter accident, he may have decided that he should probably learn how to fly a shuttlecraft more, rather than having to rely on a transporter to bring him down into a planet. But in any case, I think it plays very nicely that he is being put on a ship where his expertise with the shuttlecraft would most likely be more useful, rather than on another ship that probably uses the transporter a lot more. So I think this fits nicely with his career event regarding to transporters, and how he and it's, you know, gives him another avenue for his character to grow in ways to be more useful to the Avicenna than say any other ship. So step 7 is the final step of the life path creation process, the finishing touches. This is where you put some final numbers into your attributes and disciplines, and the last thing that you add on to it is your last value. Your, in this case, it is your fourth value. So let's just have a quick review at the values that I've chosen so far for Yang. So as you can see here, there are four at the end of every character's life path creation process. Your character should have 4 values: one that you've gained during your during the environment, one that you've gained during your days in Starfleet, one that you've gained during your career, and lastly the last one is at the end of the life path creation process itself. As I've already explained somewhat of Yang's background story of how he grew up, how he entered into Starfleet, and how and some of the crises that he had during Starfleet days, I think it's quite natural to say that Yang feel, and this is probably answering a bit on the question of what he did to betray his ideals for a superior in Starfleet, that he feels maybe there's some sort of remorse for his actions, that he may have accidentally elevated a superior by betraying his ideals, and therefore he feels there is a higher calling to make sure those ideals are met, and one of those ideals is the truth. This is probably an area where I could say that the actions that he did that elevated the superior could have been based on deceit. There may have been a lie, or at least some sort of misdirection that has been put upon him to do certain actions that resulted in the benefit of someone else rather than what he thought was going to be the truth, or what was probably the more proper way of doing things, only to find out later on that it was more of a personal agenda rather than a more altruistic goal. So this was the value that I've decided to sort of put emphasis on, this idea that based on what has happened in the past, this is what has molded him to become the man that he is today, who believes in idealistic notions of truth. And not only do we have to know the truth, we are also beholden to the responsibility of truth, that we should be somewhat honest and transparent about things, and maybe in particular with Starfleet related matters, or maybe even with Starfleet protocol, that things have to be done because it is because it leads to a truth, or the truth in this case for Yang. This is basically the makeup of Yang as a character in terms of mechanics, in terms of the life path creation rules of the start of Star Trek Adventures, in the core rules. So what is it exactly that I'm thinking or looking into playing Yang as a character for in the rest of the campaign? So in terms of ambitions and goals, as I said, being brought up in a family of bureaucrats, politicians, diplomats, or at least people who are placed in a position of leadership, this is what Yang aspires to be. This is what Yang thinks his skills, his natural born skills, are going to bring him up to. So I had to refresh my memory on where exactly Yang wants to go. The best place that he will eventually be is obviously the captaincy, but since he's starting at in the very early stages of his career, that is most likely not going to happen maybe within the span of the campaign itself. So the best he could aspire to be is try to create an impression of his leadership qualities, and maybe even impress whoever's in the commanding position on the ship of the Avicenna, and maybe be even given the opportunities to even exercise those leadership qualities, to lead, to be even provided the chance to lead in whatever small capacity that he has. He is, he still understands that this, because of his rank, he is a subordinate at this stage of his career and at this stage of his life. He will perform his duties dutifully, but I think it is quite likely that I will try to put Yang in a position, or try to convince higher ranking members of the crew that Yang is capable of being put in a situation where he can demonstrate his leadership qualities outside of performing his duties normally. And given his attributes and disciplines as a helmsman, he feels that is not only a good place for him to to be in control of the ship, quite literally, but it is also maybe the more likely place where he'd be able to volunteer himself into situations of crisis or command. So those I would say those are the ambitions of Yang as a character. But what are the intrinsic motivations or tensions that drive Yang? What are the things that may keep him up awake at night? I would definitely say his relations with Starfleet, how he perceives Starfleet as a family tradition, as a bureaucratic organization, as well as some sort of altruistic force in the wider universe. There is definitely a lot of clash between his ideals and his actions during Starfleet, as I mentioned, due to one of his career events. For now, due to his lack of experience, I would say he still maybe believes strongly to some of the ideals and principles of Starfleet from his understanding from Starfleet Academy, that those ideals are worth more than what he has been brought up with, and especially what he has gone through in Starfleet Academy. He still holds that these ideals are something that is worth fighting for, quite literally, and even if that fight has to happen within Yang himself. And I think that, as I said, Yang's characterization for me, in part, is somewhat motivated to be an opposite, maybe an annoying opposite, to Ron Edwards' character, who is, quite on the opposite side of the spectrum in terms of how what I believe, has experienced as a Starfleet officer. So not only is Yang the idealistic version of Ron Edwards' character, it's also a place where we shall see if Yang succumbs to the realities of the universe as a Starfleet officer, or he entrenches himself even harder to insist that the ideals of Starfleet should be spread throughout the galaxy even more. And as far as in terms of skills, or where I think Yang would perform best or seen in the best light, is definitely in his helmsman skills, his control maneuvers of the ship. Interestingly enough, the Avicenna is actually, I would say, a a challenging ship or a suitable ship for someone of Yang's skills, only because we are, I would say, probably above average in terms of speed. We are the Avicenna is a very maneuverable ship, uh, and because of uh, our mission of a crisis response, uh, we we are probably one of the more faster ships within the Federation during that particular time. So this definitely plays in quite well into giving the opportunity for Yang to use one of the upper grade ships that is quite suited for someone with rather upper grade skills to do so. Uh, and he is not afraid for the ship to get into a firefight, and he is quite confident that he will be able to take that ship uh, rather unscathed if such a firefight should occur. Not only because the Avicenna itself is relatively quite well armed with powerful engines to boot. Yang himself is rather has a focus in evasive actions. So he is not afraid to take. He is not afraid to be in a firefight situation, especially with a ship like the Avicenna. So yeah, so I think that's all. This is pretty much Yang. This is who Yang is, uh, as a flight officer of the Avicenna, as a member of a rather complicated relationship with Starfleet, uh, that clashes with his own ideals and his own realities. Where we can hope to see Yang will go as I get to know him a bit more better as play goes along. So I hope you've enjoyed this walkthrough of Yang. Hopefully, it informs your viewing of our Star Trek adventures in the first response campaign, and I hope to see you all very soon, uh, as we get to see Yang and the other crew of the Avicenna in our Star Trek Adventures campaign.